Hello, everyone. So I'm re-recording the maintenance phase. I think this is episode 4, Snackwell's Cookies, part 2. I don't know exactly where I left off that time because I put B-roll over the last video, the part 1 video. I deleted the raw footage of both by accident, and so I'm kind of guesstimating about where I left off. So I'm gonna just go ahead and start, and I apologize if there's some like going over old ground again. Or if I overshot and there's a small piece missing, I apologize for that. It just kind of is what it is. So I'm gonna go ahead and start it up again. I'm going to put it on 1.2 speed, and let's go ahead and start listening.
Low in animal fat and cholesterol have less cholesterol in their blood. However, there is no proof that dietary changes can actually reduce heart disease. Before we're telling people to change their diets and reduce heart disease, shouldn't there be some evidence that this works?
It also feels
Okay, no proof and no evidence are two different things. So, what was it? Dietary changes reduce it was heart disease, right? I hope it was heart disease. So, let's go studies. So, there was preventing heart disease through Harvard, and it goes over, like, where are your citations? So I'm looking at an article from Harvard. Is it Harvard? Harvard School of Public Health. There's this big article on different ways that you can prevent heart disease. One is don't smoke, maintain a healthy weight, exercise, follow a healthy diet, and improve sleep. And for their references, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, about 30 different citations from different articles ranging from what looked to be about 2010 to 2022. Oh, wait, there's one from 2006. There's one from 2000. And that one in 2000 says primary prevention of coronary heart disease in women through diet and lifestyle. So to say that there's no evidence is just flat out wrong. To say there's no proof, it feels like it's misleading. Like, proof is saying something without a shadow of a doubt or something like that, and that's just not how science works. No evidence is just categorically false. But let's hear what else they have to say.
sort of like bizarre wishful thinking. Like, I'm curious if anybody tried to do any, like, here's what it would look like to eat this way sort of guidance for folks or imagining of that. Because honestly, like, if you have whatever, a bowl.
One of the studies that was cited was based on adhering to the Mediterranean diet and how that reduced heart disease, just for the record.
Full of spinach, right? Like raw baby spinach with salad dressing on it. That is like 90% fat.
Yeah.
Even though it's a tablespoon or two of salad dressing and a big pile of spinach, that is not, by anyone's definition, as far as I know, an unhealthy meal. Right. You're hearing this advice and you're like, okay, I guess I gotta eat more salads. And then you're like, well, no, actually, salads are pretty fatty.
Or fat-free cookies, for example.
Oh, God.
But then, I mean, I feel like the real thing that did it was in 1988, we get a Surgeon General's report. Basically says, like, in black and white, everyone should reduce fat to the extent possible.
Yeah.
This is a quote from the actual Surgeon General. The report marks the first time the government has identified reduction of fat intake as the #1 dietary priority of the nation.
I've read this report. It's been a minute since I read this report, the Coop report. The thing that I found really fascinating about it is that it's looking at and sort of trying to make a run at these population level determinants of health through these individual sort of mandates of, like, when you go to the grocery store, you should buy this, rather than plan. What if the government subsidized these kinds of foods or stopped subsidizing these other kinds?
And also, I mean, I think the central sin of this report is that they didn't think of unintended consequences. So, are you familiar with Marion Nestle?
Yes, absolutely.
This is a Marion Nestle Stan account. Like, I've read her books. I've been reading her blog for more than a decade. She's one of the most preeminent, like, food and politics researchers in America. And she was actually one of the advisors on this report. And what she says later, and I think this is a huge mistake, she says the rationale, like, we knew that we wanted people to eat less saturated fat. We knew the different types of fat. We knew about, like, HDL and LDL cholesterol, etc. But we thought that was too complicated. So what we wanted to do was just tell people to eat less fat, and then people would end up eating less saturated fat. That's not how people work. And that's especially not how capitalism works.
Yeah.
See, I don't like, yes, that kind of is how people work. So by making it more accessible, by oversimplifying the um message, because if you make it too complicated and say that it has to be saturated fat, and this was during a time when like nutritional literacy wasn't what I would think was like super high, the way like we more talk about nutrition labels and stuff now. It was, I would say, closer to its infancy at that time of being like a widespread thing that people did. So oversimplifying so people don't just turn away because they're confused. Like, I don't think you understand how the average person works or how the average person handles things. If it feels too complicated or like it's over their head, they're not even going to try. If you say, look at this one number, the total fat, and reduce your overall fat intake, people are more likely to adhere to it. And if they're reducing their overall fat intake, then they are likely just through the act of reducing their fat intake, likely taking in less saturated fat. Is it a guarantee? No. Is this a foolproof method? No. Is it the best method? No. But it is the method with what would be the widest reach of someone to make um, better lifestyle changes. You know? As for that's how capitalism works, I don't really fully understand how those two intertwine, but we'll hear what they have to say.
I think that they just didn't think that like companies would take this advice and the media would take this advice and oversimplify it and basically exaggerate it to the point where it's going to make everybody sicker.
Totally. And also, like, if you're reducing fat in your diet, saturated fat remains the cheapest kind of fat to get into your diet.
Yeah.
What are the...
I don't really, again, the cheapest kind of fat to get into your diet. How? How is that the cheapest fat to get into your diet? Exactly. I don't understand that. There's fat is fat is fat. Not all fat that you take has to be saturated fat. And saturated fat is the one that is most often listed under total fat, whether it has saturated fat. Now, if you want to, there's a couple of different, what were the different types of fat? So there's like saturated fat, which is the one that's most often listed on like under the total fat. Like this is the total fat and this is the grams of saturated fat. But then there's also unsaturated fats, polyunsaturated fats, monounsaturated fats, trans fats, all of those that are less likely to be listed under the total fat, and oftentimes the saturated fat doesn't make up the total fat that's in a product, but we don't know what the other kind of fat is because it's not necessarily listed. So it's the most ubiquitously listed sort of fat that people would be able to be educated on. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's the cheapest fat. Just because you can see it everywhere because it is the most prominent fat listed, that does not mean that it is the cheapest fat.
Chances that when people are cutting out fat, that they're cutting out like French fries that they can get for 99 cents at a drive-thru, right? Like there's like convenience elements of this. There's cost elements of this. There's where does food show up in your sort of daily life? Where's the, like, where do those stimuli pop up and when do you reach for them, right?
Yeah.
Like there's so much going on here that the idea that you could just say cut all the fat, like I get where they're coming from. And also in retrospect,
Something with the fat acceptance group that I've noticed is that they love to act like everything is so much more complicated than it is. And don't get me wrong, taking in the right kind of fat is more complicated than simply reducing fat overall. But when we're talking about a wide scale usage, it's not terrible advice. Cutting out fat entirely is not something I would advise, But that doesn't mean that reducing overall fat intake, especially since when we were looking at the article, it was something like 40% of the average daily intake came from fat. So at the time, reducing overall fat intake was actually a very solid piece of advice. Because people were already taking in too much nutritional fat as it was for their average diet, along with probably taking in far more saturated fat than they needed. So this really was not, in and of itself, bad marketing, a bad piece of advice, and it was simplified in a way that the average Joe could like take it and run with it, which is the ultimate goal of these sorts of advisories. They provide advice that people can act on in their everyday life. Because for all the things of like, oh, you should just hold companies more accountable, that takes more bureaucracy and red tape than general advice that can be given to the average American person and that they can implement on their own. The thing with those types of warnings and those types of suggestions is that it's to give people a level of agency in their health. Does that mean that it is the only thing that should happen? No, but the other areas in which we can improve our food have to go through many other avenues with many other people involved, and there's less control over what can actually get done that way. At least with with this bit of advice, the average person can take it and do what they want with it. And if they are reducing their fat intake, they are likely reducing their saturated fat intake as well.
I'm like, no, of course that didn't work.
So in 2003, Marion Nestle gives an interview to PBS where she talks about this, kind of like at the end of the low-fat craze, and she says, what nobody realized, or at least I certainly never would have guessed, was that the food industry would substitute vegetable fats for animal fats in such a profound way and would also substitute sugars for fats and keep the calorie content of their products exactly the same. Mm-hmm. The best example is the SnackWell phenomenon. SnackWell cookies were advertised as no-fat cookies, but they had almost the same amount of calories. In fact, if you go to the store today and look at Oreos, they have a reduced fat Oreo cookie that has, I think, 6 calories less than the regular Oreo cookie. It's lower in fat, but it's higher in carbohydrates. And so I think all of this dovetails with really the expansion of the obesity epidemic and the construction of the obesity epidemic, that Americans were getting fatter, stigma against fat people is severe, people were desperate to lose weight, and the diet industry was becoming a thing at this point, and the food, like mechanics, reduced fat.
So I really hate that the diet industry was becoming a thing at this point. Let's not fucking pretend that the diet industry was formed in the 90s. Fucking please. Alright, there's ones dating back as God. I can remember seeing like old newspaper advertisements from the early 1800s, like 1840 something, on ways to lose weight or gain weight. Hell, there were prescriptions during the Victorian era, prescriptions for weight loss because obesity was a much rarer thing, but still had the potential to be an issue in the Victorian era. And one of the prescriptions was knitting, so that way it would theoretically keep someone's hands busy and they wouldn't eat as much. And that's like the healthy one. There were also like tapeworms and all sorts of like stuff that would be banned on the market today due to health risks that were meant to make you lose weight. I think there was a point. Meth is, was it meth, or was it like cocaine, or there was some sort of illicit, that's an illicit drug now that's completely like you cannot, it's an illegal drug that was available more widespread during this time that was supposed to help you lose weight because it suppressed your appetite and revved up your metabolism. Like that was the thing, and part of the reason, and I like the big thing at the time, like the big beauty expectation at the time was that you were very pale and very thin to the point of fainting. Now, this was the result of what they didn't know at the time was this was the result of, I believe, tuberculosis that was running like more rampant in uh populations. But that was still like a beauty standard at the time, was to be really thin um and really pale. And then of course there was the issue of tight lacing. Like, there were all sorts of diet and beauty standard issues way before the fucking 90s. Let's not pretend. That's another thing with the fat acceptance movement that I've noticed, is that they have a very selective view of diet industry and the history of these sort of beauty fads. Like, this has been happening across cultures and across time for at least a couple hundred years. So, and honestly, let's be honest, probably longer than that, but this is what I have the most access to, and what I've personally seen was at least from a couple hundred years ago, this was still a thing. Now, was it as rampant? Was there the advertising that there is now? No. But that doesn't mean that it didn't exist.
At this, and fortified with that, was also becoming a thing and was playing on people's desperation to lose weight. And I think that the authors of this report thought that they were putting it into a country where people were just like, I guess I should eat like this to reduce heart disease. But people were not interested in reducing heart disease at this point. They were interested in being thin.
Yeah, God, that's so tricky.
That's the case of just humans in general. They want like you can't see the reduction in heart disease risk. Like, you can't see that. Humans are very tangible creatures. We'd like to see results. We'd like to see progress. And a way to do that, a way to see that, is by losing weight and seeing that on yourself. If you are reducing fat intake and you're reducing heart disease risk while also losing weight, the losing weight is what you're going to judge your success on because it's what you can see. That's very just human.
Because you're like, oh, you're coming from such a pure place.
I know. It's like, oh, Marion, you did your best, sweetie.
Totally. That you're like, okay, I'm just going to put out these recommendations that are going to help people reduce heart disease. It's going to be really precise. It's really scientific. And here we go.
Right.
Like, and we've really considered all the options. And then you put it out into the world. And people are like, it'll make you thin. And you're like, no, that's not the... Okay.
Immediately after this report comes out, this is when we get the flood of low-fat products onto the market. We also get like a lot of magazines and newspapers took this up, like Prevention magazine, which is not like as much of a deal now, but was huge, like a really, really influential women's magazine in the 80s and 90s. Basically, they had like diets where they would say like how to switch from low fat to no fat.
Absolutely. My recollection from, again, like 90s diet foods was, I remember being in middle school very distinctly and being very excited to eat some fat-free Yoplait yogurt out of curiosity at the time that I was sort of like, continuing to hone my lens on like, what are calorie counts? What are, what's the sugar content, all that kind of stuff. And I remember being completely shocked at how much sugar was in fat-free yogurt. So it's also just like this really tricky thing where it's sort of like, oh my God, all of these like very sweet, well-intentioned people really thought they were going to stick it to corporations and get people to be healthier. And actually the corporations were like, somehow this only makes us stronger.
It's like,
You're like, no.
So I gave you a homework assignment for this episode. Should we do that?
Yes. Oh my God, let's do it. I'm so excited.
Okay. So in preparation for this episode, I went to my local grocery store and bought a box of Snackwell's Devil's Food cookies. And we should say, like, as a disclaimer, that the fat-free version, like the one that we're going to talk about that was introduced in 1992, no longer exists for reasons that we will get into. So what we have in front of us is a box.
So I don't remember whether I showed this to you guys on the last part or if it was part of what I had recorded originally, but I actually looked up Snackwell's cookies as well before they did this to kind of look, and the fat-free version is no longer on the market. I believe they have a like no saturated fat or no trans fat option, but the fat-free version is no longer available, and the current version says like new and improved formula or something like that, which means of course they don't taste very good. And they're trying the non fat-free version, which was part of the new and improved formula because that's all that's available. And I don't really think that it's fair to judge the taste on that because when you change the formula, you often change the taste. Very rarely is a new and improved formula can be better than the original, very rarely. And like it just kind of reminds me of, does anyone remember like the good NyQuil before Sudafed had to be put behind the pharmacy counter? Does anyone remember that? NyQuil changed their formula to try to stay out from behind the pharmacy counter, which was such a mistake. I would much rather get my cold medicine from behind the pharmacy counter and be able to fucking sleep, because the NyQuil, they were like huge fucking pills, but my God, you slept well. You never, like, you were out. that was the beauty of NyQuil. You were fucking out. You were dead to the world because you slept so fucking well while you were sick. Like, the NyQuil that we have now fucking sucks. And I'm sorry, but I had to go off on that tangent because I'm so fucking angry. As someone who, like, works around kids and gets sick, I would fucking love some NyQuil sometimes. Because nothing helps the way the old NyQuil did. Like, I've never found a new combination that works just as well. I've never found that, and it bugs me, and I want the old NyQuil back. Put it behind the pharmacy counter. I don't fucking care. Just give me the old NyQuil, please.
Of it just says on the box 40% less fat, but it's not clear like what it's 40% less fat than.
Okay.
Okay, well, are we gonna do this? I got 12 in front of me.
I'm cutting into my bag. I realize I probably should have done away with cellophane before this. God, these look really disappointing.
We should also say that the company SnackWells is no longer owned by Nabisco. It's like one of these corporate whatever. It's passed hands a couple times, and they've changed the recipe. And when we looked at these online, the reviews are universally negative. Like if you go on Amazon, it's like all 1-star reviews. Like people fucking hate these cookies.
So I got mine on Amazon because I couldn't find them in any grocery stores, which feels like a pretty good indicator.
Please let it be known, though, that, like, I remember when they were still owned by Nabisco, and I remember eating them. They were pretty good, if I remember correctly, when they were still owned by Nabisco and it was the original formula. Like, I'm sure that the new formula fucking sucks because that's typically the way it goes, but that doesn't necessarily mean the original cookie sucked.
Yeah.
Of where SnackWells is at today. But when I found them online, the average review was 1.5 stars. Which I was like, it's a chocolate cookie. Like, how much do you have to screw it up to get 1.5 stars on a chocolate cookie? Uh-oh.
All right, so here we go. All right.
All right, let's do
got
it.
one in front of you?
Yep, got it.
All right.
No.
Oh, it's really chewy.
Mm-hmm. There's like a layer of chocolate cake cookie kind of vibe.
Yeah.
And then a layer of extremely springy marshmallow on top of that.
Yeah, like gummy bear chewy.
Mm-hmm. And then the whole thing is dipped in some kind of chocolate flavored coating.
Oh, it's not that bad. I thought it would be worse, actually.
The cake layer tastes like it's like just barely being kept together. I don't know if yours are sort of falling apart.
Yeah.
Like the baker in me is like, they needed more egg.
But that has fat. That has as much fat as the leading brand, Aubrey. So.
Yeah, sorry, whoops.
Well, but it has like a grittiness. I mean, I guess that's the sugar and the marshmallow, but there's like, you can taste like grains. There's like grains of something in it.
Mm-hmm. Like that bottom layer, the cake layer, it's not quite sawdust texture,
right?
But it's also not far off.
It's not sawdust. Yeah.
yeah.
I know, honestly, I've had worse store-bought cookies.
Sure, yes.
You know?
But if the question is like, would I get these of my own accord?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, totally.
I have like a weird aftertaste now. It's like super duper chocolatey.
So I wonder, hang on, I want to look at the ingredients on the, oh.
Dude, I know. I wrote them down. There's, what is it, 17 ingredients?
This feels like the science words label.
Yeah, oh, totally.
Here's what I have for my ingredients in order. Wheat flour, corn syrup, invert sugar, which I choose to believe just means gay sugar.
Yes.
Hydrogenated vegetable oil, which is coconut and or palm oil. Then coconut powder, then glycerin, and then just leavening.
Yeah, that's what mine has too.
An action more than an ingredient, but okay.
But so now we know.
Now we know.
So apparently at Nabisco, first of all, they launched the SnackWell brand specifically to capitalize on this. When they were designing the cookies, they called it Project Zero because they wanted zero fat. Like they set out to make a zero fat cookie. Another thing I found an old marketing digest of like how the SnackWells cookies were marketed, and they talked about how diet food at the time was fucking terrible. It was like, you know, these Weight Watchers things and like Slim Fast shakes, and most of the low fat stuff at the time was like fruit based, and this was the first time that it was like a chocolate low fat product, like a low fat product that looked like a normal product. Like that hadn't been seen before.
There's like so much wishful thinking that goes into the creation of diet foods, right? Which is sort of like the idea that you could lose a bunch of weight and eat foods that are as decadent, if not more so.
Yeah.
You could lose weight, you could have a healthier heart, and you could eat these chocolate marshmallow sawdust cookies.
It's also, I mean, I think it's also like we've totally forgotten about this now, but SnackWells cookies were one of the first snack products that were marketed to adults. That like snacks were, you know, seen as like gummy bears and stuff, like things that kids would eat.
So this is just incorrect. So something that I did during the first recording of this is I took a look at adult snacks from like the 70s. And the only thing that I will know is that snacks geared towards adults that were marketed towards adults tended to be more like cheeses, like the cheese in a can thing that was actually originally marketed towards adults as part of like an addition to a charcuterie board. And like Pringles was initially because it was neater and it was all in this cylindrical tube that was easy to transport and stuff. That was also marketed towards adults. So to say that it was one of the first snacks marketed towards adults is incorrect. There were snacks before that were marketed towards adults. They just, from what I could see, were not typically sweet. And gummy bears, even at the time, I think were seen more as like a candy and a treat than a snack, but I could be wrong there. Uh, but yeah, so let me know what your thoughts are on that. But I'm pretty sure snacks, like I know because I saw the advertisements, were marketed towards adults before SnackWell's cookies. They just weren't typically cookies. They weren't typically sweet. They were more savory snacks.
And this is really the beginning of like the snack industry. The idea of like, 3 p.m., you're at work, you want to have like a little nibble, that as like a marketing category didn't really exist yet. And so another reason why the snack was
I'm pretty sure that's not actually the case. That specific point though, I did not look up, and I think it's gonna be kind of hard to tell when when was snack time. So snacking among U.S. adults started increasing from 1997 to 2003. It increased 97%. Now the thing is that that's almost a 30-year span. I While the promotion of diet snacks, meaning that they were healthier for you, I could see how that accelerated snacking, but it still doesn't mean that snacks were not part of like the general part of the general cultural norms to an extent. Maybe not to the extent that we have it now. Eating a small dish or a snack in between meals has been around for millennia. So while it may not have necessarily been in vogue, that doesn't mean that it didn't exist.
cookies went so far is because they had like a year of lead time of like telling people that like it was okay to snack on something if you're an adult.
Totally fascinating. Well, and also like now there are like whole, like as you're talking about this, I'm like, oh right, there are whole ad campaigns now around adult snacking, right? That's like, grab this 100-calorie pack of almonds instead of the donut in the break room at work, or the hungry grab a Snickers ad campaign, right? Where you're like, well, that's not, Snickers isn't for hunger, everybody.
I mean, it's funny you mention that because they deliberately made the package of Snackwell cookies smaller so that, first of all, it would be under $2, which they really wanted it to be cheap. And secondly, they didn't want it to be seen as like a family package of stuff. Like they talk about how like you buy Oreos and there's like 48 of them. And it's very clear that it's like supposed to be in the cupboard. It's like a family thing that you bring out after the family has eaten dinner or something. But these were supposed to be like individual. You were supposed to get them yourself and take them to work with you. And so part of this thing of like eating the whole box, it's not clear that like they intended for that to be the outcome, but like the box was much smaller. 12 cookies in a box was kind of an innovation.
That's what they're counting on, is like some level of binge eating, whether or not that's the language that they have for it or the framework or whatever, right? Like they're designing something to be eaten in a single sitting or a couple of sittings by one person.
This is also the beginning of what researchers call nutritionism, which I think has like taken over the US food supply. This idea that the healthiness or unhealthiness of a product is related to whether or not it has a specific thing. The idea that like, well, it's low in fat, so it's healthy for me, or like it's high in omega-3s. This is something that is deliberately pushed by food companies so that they can put a nice...
In the defense of marketing something as high in omega-3s, that doesn't make it healthy, and I'm not saying that it does. But for someone like me who does not eat seafood in the slightest, something being marketed as high in omega-3s would be beneficial for me because I take a new omega-3 supplement strictly because I don't eat seafood. I don't eat things that are typically high in omega-3s. I also don't go like I live in a place where it's cloudy and rainy most of the year. I don't get a whole lot of sun, so I take a vitamin D supplement. Like it's having advertisements of like the good things in the food, I don't think is necessarily bad. It doesn't make the food healthy. That's the one thing I will say, is that it doesn't make the food healthy, but I don't necessarily think that it's bad to show, hey, this food has this nutrient in it. Because for some people, like they're probably not getting enough of that nutrient, and or their body processes the nutrient differently. It's one of those things with like gluten-free. Does everyone need to eat gluten-free? No. But there are those that do need it, and so having an influx of products that promote the fact that it's gluten-free is beneficial for that group. And if some people eat it due to it being a food fad, I don't necessarily think it's going to hurt them. At least as far as I know, it's not going to hurt them. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Label on their product, like the really infamous one was that there used to be a little nutrition label on the front of the Lucky Charms box that said Lucky Charms boosts immunity. I don't know how the fuck they came up, like I think it was fortified with like vitamin A or some shit, like something that, like, you know, Americans are not getting like rickets at like large rates, but it was like a way of being like, oh well, it boosts immunity, so like of course I can have a bowl of Lucky Charms for breakfast. It's this idea of like this very binary understanding of health that is completely like it benefits nobody other than.
For that one, I would say that's primarily marketing and capitalism. Like it's presenting a bad food option as a good food option purely for sales. It's not that it's actually healthy, and I don't think that anyone worth their salt in the medical field would say that that's a healthy option because of the advertising. But that's how predatory advertising works. Is that it's like, oh, this is a new health crisis or health concern, so we're going to advertise that we help that health concern or as a way to alleviate that health concern, as a way to sell more products, even if any benefit from our product would be nominal at best.
Food companies.
Right. It's a little bit like the sort of like freak out about gluten that happened maybe 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
That was sort of like everyone's got to get gluten out of their diets, that there was Grain Brain and Wheat Belly and all of those sort of diet books.
Oh, totally.
Our brains are going to hang on to one thing. We're all freaked out about both our mortality and our appearance. And here's one element, omega-3s or gluten or sugar or carbs or fat or whatever it is that you can then just hang on to that allays.
Okay, putting omega-3s and gluten on the same level as sugar, I think is a mistake. I don't think those are equal at all in why we should be concerned about them. Sugar is in far too much of our food. Like there's added sugar in just about every realm of our food, every product, every item, every category. And so I don't think that it's wrong to be concerned about that, and I don't think that that's on the same level as being concerned about gluten or concerned about any number of things. Because sugar, I think, is something that we need to be concerned about our intake of. Like, there's so many issues with sugar that it makes sense to be concerned about that. And with the overconsumption of fat, I do think that that was a reasonable concern at the time, given how much of a person's daily caloric intake came from fat. So it's not quite the same as the food fads. Like there's like legitimate concerns to be had, and then there's ones that might be worth taking under advisement, but need to be determined on an individual basis, like gluten, like omega-3s, that sort of thing. And there's very few cases, I think, where intaking more sugar would be beneficial for someone.
All of those fears.
I think the grossest example of this is the complete corruption of the American Heart Association, that they start allowing brands to pay them to put heart healthy stickers on the front of their packages. Do you remember these? It's like a little heart logo with a white check mark.
Those were paid?
I mean, you still have to match, like you still have to meet some like basic criteria. Like they're not putting it on literally anything.
Sure.
But like they started putting it on any product that was low fat. So in the 90s, you could get a heart healthy sticker on Frosted Flakes, Marshmallow Krispies, and fucking Pop-Tarts.
Right. It was on like every cereal. That's what I remember.
Yeah. Oh yeah, me too. Yeah.
Yeah.
But like that's a completely absurd understanding of health. Oh yeah, you know, Honey Nut Cheerios are low in fat, so they're good for you. And they're just like pure refined grains. Like try to make cereal in the kitchen. Like cereal is not a food. It's like you can only make it on an industrial scale. I love reading these old accounts. I found like all these like industry trade publications where this is bananas. By 1995.
So I want to just go over, we're going to the American Health Association and the heart check certification and how the heart check certification program works. All right, so how a food becomes heart check certified. Step 1, company approved to participate in heart check program. The American Heart Association must approve the company for participation, and companies must formally agree to all policies of the heart check program. Step 2, project submitted and reviewed for heart check certification. A product's nutritional profile must meet heart check nutrition criteria and regulatory requirements. Now we're going to take a look at the criteria. Standard certification. So the Heart Check Food Certification Program nutritional requirements. Standard certification, FDA regulated products. Total fat has to be less than 6.5 grams. Saturated fat has to be 1 gram or less, and 15% or less calories from saturated fat. Trans fat less than 0.05 grams, also per label serving. Products containing partially hydrogenated oils are not eligible for certification. Cholesterol is 20 milligrams or less. Sodium, 1 of 4 sodium limits applies depending on the particular food category, up to 140 milligrams, 240 milligrams, or 360 milligrams per label serving, or 480 milligrams per label serving and per RACC. And then beneficial nutrients naturally occurring 10% or more of the daily value of one of 6 nutrients: vitamin A, vitamin C, iron, calcium, protein, or dietary fiber. Additional food category specific requirements. Canned fruits and vegetables have to have no heavy syrup. Frozen fruit has to be 100% fruit, no added sugar. Fruit and vegetable juice has to be 100% juice or 100% juice plus water with no added sugars or sweeteners. 120 calories or less per 8 fluid ounce. 120 calories or less per 8 fluid ounces. 10% daily value or greater for 3 nutrients for which daily value exists. At least one of these beneficial nutrients must satisfy the beneficial nutrients requirement listed above. Grain-based products. All grain-based products must be a good source of dietary fiber, meaning 10% or more of the daily value, and contain 7 grams or less total sugar per serving. If the product is a good source of dietary fiber, or 9 grams or less total sugars per serving if the product is an excellent source of dietary fiber, meaning it has 20% or more of the daily value. Sugars from pieces of fruit do not count towards sugar allowance, but amount and source must be disclosed. And that part of the reason for that is the general advice for like sugar intake is based on added sugars, not natural sugars. Grain-based and snack bars. If product is used, the new nutrition facts label format product must be a good source of dietary fiber, meaning 10% or more, and contain 8 grams or less of added sugar. If product uses old nutrition facts label format, the requirement for all other grain-based products apply. For milk and dairy alternatives, it's 130 calories or less per 8 fluid ounces. God, I cannot speak. Smoothies, 200 calories or less per 8 fluid ounces, or 300 calories or less per 9 to 20 ounces. 2 teaspoons or less added sugar per serving. Must contain at least 1 serving of whole fruit or vegetable, not including any added juices or puree concentrate, which will be counted as added sugars, or dairy/dairy alternatives. Caffeine and other stimulant additives are not permitted. Caffeine occurring naturally in other ingredients like green tea is permitted. Snacks must have 5 grams or less added sugar per serving. Naturally occurring sugars do not count towards this limit. Grain-based snacks must be a good source of dietary fiber, meaning 10% or more. Yogurt must be 20 grams or less total sugar per standard 6-ounce serving. And then it continues on like this. There's this whole I've read enough of the relevant stuff, but that's kind of what we're looking for when we're looking at the Heart Check Food Certification Program. There's an actual list of requirements. Whether you agree with it or not, I'll leave up to you, but I just wanted us to have kind of a base for understanding.
There were 1,914 new low-fat products hitting the market. That's almost 2,000 new products that are marketed as low fat on the market in 1995.
Wow.
And this is from a Times op-ed, like after all this is over. It says, by the mid-90s, a flood of low-fat products entered the food supply. Non-fat salad dressing, baked potato chips, low-fat sweetened milk and yogurt, and low-fat processed turkey and bologna.
Low-fat bologna is like its own ring of hell.
Gross. What's even in it?
Just, ugh.
I like almost hope that it's like sawdust, because then it can't be like absorbed.
Yeah,
like what else are
totally.
they putting in it?
Just ground up newspapers. Yeah.
There's also, do you remember, this is like deep cuts, dude. There was something called the McLean Deluxe. Like McDonald's had a low-fat hamburger.
I don't remember this.
I remember getting it.
How was it?
I don't know. I think I liked it just because I liked McDonald's stuff as a kid.
Sure.
I wasn't like a discerning customer at like 12 years old. There were also, Taco Bell had tacos called Border Lights.
Oh, I definitely remember Border Lights.
Kentucky Fried Chicken had skinless chicken. It was everywhere.
That was also like the point at which in my...
To be fair though, like skinless chicken, I don't see what the issue is. Personally, I don't like skin on my chicken. I don't. Like, I think it's gross. I don't like the texture, but that's me. I don't think that that's something crazy. Of the things that you've listed, like skinless chicken doesn't, I don't understand why that was such a big deal.
house, all of those products shifted over to the low-fat version of whatever it was.
Oh, yeah, me too, yeah.
Low-fat, reduced fat cheese.
Oh,
Oof.
remember that stuff?
What a bummer.
It's like toothpaste.
Ugh.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating in retrospect, given how sort of our conversation about nutrition has progressed in the meantime.
Mm-hmm.
The idea was you should still be buying stuff from the middle of the store.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You should still be buying shelf-stable stuff in boxes. It should still come from General Mills or Nabisco or whatever, but you have to get the reduced fat version of that thing. It was also a time when like people were like, don't eat nuts, don't eat cheese, don't eat avocados. Oh my God, don't eat avocados, right?
Yeah.
So it's also fascinating to see how much of this is like how far the pendulum swings.
By 1995, Snackwell's, if it had been a standalone company, it would have been the third largest food company in America.
And this is a really fascinating moment where like my kid brain is catching up to my adult understanding of things, right? Where I'm like, I for sure was just like, oh, my family just really liked this brand.
Oh yeah, that's how I thought before I started researching this too.
Totally. I did not think like, no, this was like a really concerted sort of marketing effort. It was sort of the perfect storm of like public health recommendations and then corporations and like sort of the food industry and diet industry seizing on those. All of this stuff, like, of course it's all of those things. And it isn't just like, my dad really likes marshmallows, so we got marshmallow cookies. Like, that's not what it was.
Do you remember the ads? Do you remember the Cookie Man ads?
I don't remember anything about the advertising from Snackwell's.
I think we don't remember it because we were too young and the marketing was aimed at adults. So I found a compilation on YouTube of the ads that they ran for Snackwell's. The central premise is that they're in such high demand that stores are running low. And that's actually fucking true. Stores would run out, and there's like apocryphal stories of people who would follow the delivery trucks to the store. Like if they were out driving and they saw a delivery truck, they would follow it to the grocery store so that they could get it because you could not get these cookies anywhere.
This is like the Beatles of snack foods.
It's ridiculous.
Just like people like...
Okay, you say it's ridiculous, and I agree. I want to be clear. I agree that it's ridiculous. However, let's not pretend that this is like something unique to the diet foods. Like, do y'all remember the Stanley craze? Like, people go nuts over fad shit all the time. Like, it's just the way people are. It doesn't surprise me that they were like trying so hard to get their hands on these Snackwell cookies. That doesn't surprise me in the slightest. People get fanatical over weird shit.
Screaming and following them, or maybe a better comparison, the Furby of snack foods. Like, good luck finding one. So was there like a peak of Snackwell's popularity? Do we know?
It's actually fascinating. It's like 92 it introduces, 95 it peaks. By 1998 it basically doesn't exist anymore.
Interesting.
And I don't know like how much this contributed to it, but during this time these studies start to come out about what is now known as the Snackwell's effect. So they do these studies where they bring people into a room and there's like a bowl of M&Ms. And they're like, oh yeah, have as many as you want. We're waiting. We'll call you in later. And there's a scale under the bowl so they can see how many M&Ms you eat. And for one group, they say, oh, have some M&Ms. And for the other group, they say, oh, they're low-fat M&Ms. They're new. Have as many as you want. And the people that get the low-fat M&Ms, which don't exist, by the way, they eat 30% more than the people who have the regular M&Ms. The logic or the theory of this is that there's so much shame around food. These don't produce the same amount of shame.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's the case. I don't think it's a matter of shame. I think, hey, these are new low-fat M&Ms, which means, hey, these are healthier, therefore I can have more. I think that's a far more likely train of thought than I don't have to feel ashamed about eating these. I think that I think that's a far more likely train of thought than, oh, I don't have to feel shame about eating these. Because, like, I think there's an over preoccupation with fat acceptance in the realm of, like, what's shameful. Not everything has to be shameful or not shameful. Some people don't even consider shame at all when engaging in something. However, the perception that something is healthier for you could give someone an incentive to be like, well, it's not that bad then, I can have more. I think that's a far more likely train of thought.
You feel like, oh, I ate the whole box of cookies, but like it's no fat, so it's okay to eat the box of cookies. And so it's not really something that people like reckon with in the literature, the way that foods affect emotions. But it seems like that's a big part of the SnackWell's effect.
Totally. And like from a corporate perspective, right, from a profit motive perspective, if people are eating 30% more of your product, they are giving you 30% more money.
Yes.
Like that at some point or another, they will continue to buy your product at a higher rate if they are eating more of it.
Right. And there's studies of this too. What's weird is despite all this, the sheer scale of this low fat craze, Americans didn't eat like that much less fat. They just ate more. Like if you look at daily calorie consumption, it increased by something like 400 calories per person during this period.
Really?
Yeah. And that was almost all carbohydrates. As a percentage, we ate less fat, but like we ate the same raw amount of fat. I mean, my theory on this is that it's just satiety.
Yeah.
That like you eat a box of fucking SnackWell cookies and you are not full. You're just going to eat more like an hour later as if you haven't eaten anything because this food is like specifically designed to go straight through you. Like there's no fiber in it. There's nothing in it that would like trigger all of the hormones that are like telling you like I'm done eating now.
I actually agree with them on this. I think that the higher intake of calories and stuff came from the lack of satiety that you would get from the fat. Because all you're eating is like straight simple carbohydrates. There's no fiber, there's nothing of substance really in what you're eating. So you're going to get hungry sooner. Like I actually agree with them here.
Here's all the hormones that say I'm not full.
Well, and there's also the whole sort of like world of food science, right? Around snack foods and sort of packaged foods like these.
Yeah.
There is a whole little industry of people whose job it is to make these irresistible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Every product wants you to buy the most of it. And so, by 1995 it peaks, by 98 it's basically cratered. And there's this hella shady New York Times article in 1998 with the headline, Nabisco gives in as consumers shun SnackWell's demanding taste. And it's about how in 1998, SnackWell started adding fat to the cookies because they tasted like shit and nobody wanted to eat them unless they were desperate to lose weight.
Yeah.
There's not as much fat as there would be in like an Oreo, I guess, but like there's some fat because fat carries flavor.
Yeah, totally.
2002, 2003 is when the low fat craze really ends. And when you read the academic articles, they have this sense of like wonder and mystery. They're like, well, I don't know why, it really took us these like extra years to really drop the low fat craze. And it's like, Atkins.
Yeah.
It's not like Americans are like reading their copy of the Journal of the American Medical Association and being like, I believe I shall change my diet. Like, no, it was another fucking fad diet, you guys. Like, it's not hard.
Another fad diet promising essentially the same thing.
Yes.
If you eat this way, if you do this thing, we will make you thin. You will be healthier by every measure / no measure.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's sort of the way that these conversations about health happen around diet are super duper duper imprecise, right? People aren't like, we started out talking about this as like an issue of like heart disease, which is a very specific conversation. And the bigger these conversations get and the further they veer into diet land, the further they veer away from like useful data, useful practices, right? Like precise information, all of that. It just becomes every idea about health and beauty and desirability and size and like they all get sort of collapsed into one another.
We've clearly moved on from the low fat ideology, but the meta ideology of this stuff, I don't know if we've grown that much. Like, it's really difficult to do research on this because a lot of the books about the rise of the low fat craze are written by people who are pitching their own diet. Gary Taubes, who wrote the infamous What If Fat Doesn't Make You Fat article that basically launched the Atkins diet in the New York Times in 2002. He has now become this weird, like, eat nothing but bacon guy. I read his book, but like you have to sort of like cut out the parts that are like, and that's why sausages are the best, right? And you're like, I don't know, Gary. And then I read another book by Nina Teicholz. It's all about how like fat is good for you and we should all be eating like a super high fat diet. And like, there's actually some interesting data behind that, whatever. It's difficult to get historical information about this stuff from when every single source is trying to tell you that like, no, the new thing is like fat is good, right? Like, it's simplistic to say fat is bad, but like actually fat is good. And it's like, that actually sounds just as simplistic to me.
And the fears that we are trying to allay, or the solutions that we're trying to find as individuals, are also pretty simplistic, right?
Yes.
You're afraid of dying, you're afraid of not having good health, you're afraid of, whatever the things are. What you're doing in that moment, what you're looking for, arguably, when you reach for a box of SnackWells or for any of these sorts of things, is a way of allaying your own anxiety that may or may not have any relationship to what it actually does to your body or to your health, right? That has infinitely more to do with your feelings about your own body and your emotional state than it does to do with anything related to the science behind these products, the nutritional value of them, right?
It's much more individual. Like, this quest for like, this food is good and this food is bad and this diet is good and this diet is bad negates how much individual variation there is. Like, I know people that are on low-fat diets and they love their low-fat diet and it gives them energy and it makes them happy. And like, I'm not interested in taking that away from them. Like, if you're on a low-fat diet, then like, have a blast. Like, if it's healthy for you, then it's healthy for you. I don't see any reason to say that like, oh, it's bad for everybody. In the same way, I don't see any reason to say it's good for everybody.
Yeah.
And I know people that are on like super duper low carb, like the people that have managed to keep Atkins for like a decade. Like, I know those people and they're happy with their diets.
Yeah. Like, if it works for you, it works for you. And you should have access to accurate information.
Right.
As you're making the decision of like what kind of food you want to eat, what kind of, like, if you want to subscribe to a model of a diet that someone else created.
Right.
I think that's part of what makes this also tricky, is that folks are looking for very direct, very clear cut, and very tested solutions.
Yeah.
That for the most part don't actually exist in the universalized
exist.
kind of way that we want them to.
There's sort of, you have to do the obligatory thing at the end of this episode where you like read through all the literature reviews that have like tested the low-fat diet compared to other diets. I can read you excerpts, like there was one in 2001, there was one in 2005, there's one in 2015, where it's like they test like the South Beach diet and a low-fat diet and Atkins and whatever. And most of these studies find like no real difference. Like, you look at the actual data on each one of the diets, and like every diet study finds the same thing. Some people gain weight on the diet, some people have nothing, and some people lose weight on the diet.
Yeah. There's
no real evidence that like a low-fat diet in general, like on a population level, does anything.
Yeah.
And let me end with like this extremely long but extremely good quote from Anne LaBerge, who's a professor who's written about the history of the low-fat diet craze. She says, low-fat recommendations competed with the reality of grocery stores and restaurants filled with fattening foods of all sorts and decreasing cost and increasing availability of food of all sorts. Food became widely available 24/7. Americans ate more processed food. The changing social structure, for example, the two-worker family or the single-parent family, meant the families ate out more often. Low-fat made living and eating difficult, requiring both healthcare practitioners and patients to be counterculture. For some Americans, eating low-fat meant denying local or ethnic heritages. Following a low-fat diet was also expensive, inconvenient, and, in fact, elitist. One had to avoid most restaurants and most foods sold in grocery stores. The result was two cultures, fat and low-fat.
Yeah.
This is the problem with every single fad diet, is that it competes with the reality of people's fucking lives.
Yeah.
I had this old yoga teacher who would say that everyone should be upside down for like 1 hour a day, like doing a headstand or a handstand. I think about it all the time because like she might have been right, but also like I can't fucking do that. I can't do that in the office. I can't do that at home. It's not going to happen. So it's kind of irrelevant whether she's right or not because it's not going to work for anybody. We clearly need to come up with something that will actually work for everybody. And the fact that this doesn't work, that you're hungry.
So here's the thing. I don't think you're ever going to find a one-size-fits-all solution. I would also say that in general, focusing on a fad level sort of diet is just not going to be beneficial. I would say ignore the fad diets because they're not going to, on the grand scheme of things, they tend to be too extreme and unhelpful for the vast majority of people. Making lifestyle changes, and I don't know why there's this grouping in of lifestyle changes and diets because they're a bit different. Lifestyle changes are more customizable as well. Just start with one thing at a time. Cut out soda as much as you can. Cut out like desserts as much as you can. Just following that line of thought process. Pick one thing. Pick one thing that you want to cut back on or eliminate and work towards it. And even then, like, you don't have to eliminate it completely. Like, I don't drink soda much, right? I for the vast majority of what I eat, I have water with my meals. But on the weekend, or when we go out to a restaurant or something, which might be like once a month or something, or if we get like if on Fridays I tend to have like a treat sort of meal, like mod pizza or something, and I'll get a soda with it. But at most it's like a once a week deal for me. That's not an issue. I still cut out soda for the vast majority of my week. and I have the one soda like once a week. So it's about lifestyle changes. You don't have to cut something out completely for it to be effectively eliminated, you know?
And like pissed off and like binging and tired and emotional all the time, that actually is like pretty relevant to whether or not we should recommend this to people. That's not some like footnote.
So much of the sort of like dietary information that gets tossed out is sort of like assuming that humans are some kind of like processing plant and then we'll put something in at the beginning and the same product comes out every time, rather than like, no, there are workers who work in the plant and sometimes they get sick and sometimes the machinery malfunctions and also it's a person, it's not a fucking processing plant.
And so, yeah, if you like your low-fat diet, you can keep it. If you like SnackWell cookies, eat them. If you don't like them, don't eat them.
Just like eat what's right for you.
Yeah, eat the things that you like. If you eat a whole box of SnackWell's cookies, you're not a terrible person.
Right, totally.
Don't shit on other people's diets, especially. Don't give unwarranted diet advice to people you do not know that well because their bodies are different from yours.
100%.
And if you see a SnackWell's delivery truck, follow it to the store.
Yeah, it might be your only chance.
It's the last one in America.
So, I'd say overall with this one, I had less issue with it than I have with previous podcast episodes of theirs. I do like that they acknowledge that some people like their low carb diet or low fat diet or whatever it is. And I appreciate the idea of just letting people kind of choose and it not necessarily being a bad thing or you're giving into diet culture because you have a low carb or low fat diet. So I can appreciate that. There were some things that I felt weren't cited properly or that were presented in a very slanted light, but I didn't hate this episode of the podcast. But I'm curious of your thoughts. What did you think of this? Let me know in the comments down below. Uh, for my Rambos, first things first, I just want to talk real quick about all the stuff I made in my first week on summer vacation. I made 7 different like stuffed animals. They were all cut and sew, so it's not like it was this complicated process, but I made 7 of them, and I'm really happy with how they turned out. I also made a pair of pajama pants with my first ever time trying to put pockets into my pajama pants, and I'm very satisfied with how it came out. First ever pockets, I'm very happy with it. And I also made like 50 half pans of watercolor paint from my sister's old makeup, which was a really fun, it's a very satisfying process. I actually have some B-roll that might be in this video showing some of what I did. So that was really nice and really fun. Going over some of my Tappy Tunes reading, I Became the Villain's Mother is something that I'm really loving. She came in as stepmother, was nice to this kid that's kind of a psychopath, and so he isn't as. It's funny because he's kind of a psychopath. He's really kind of a dark person, but like she became his soft spot a little bit, and he specifically doesn't become his worst self because he's afraid that she will no longer like him. So it's been a really fun series. I've been really enjoying it. Cupid in the Rainbow Trap is cute-ish. There's a lot of jealousy from the boyfriend. It's very slice of life. It's very doesn't feel like a whole lot's happening, but it's a fun read. Honey Bear, they're slowly starting to come into their relationship. Savage Forest is creating something really interesting, where these two outcasts, one has now become essentially the chief of the village, right? But everyone still treats what's essentially his wife. They're not the village is kind of weird with how they view relationships. Not weird, but very different. Uh, Although he's monogamist, which goes kind of against the general perspective of the village, and she has a limp. So because of that, because she's disabled, they view her the village views her kind of as a moocher and like very negatively. And it's revealed that it seems that she is the long lost princess of a different tribe. And so that's where we are right now, and we're trying to see like what is going on and how this is going to work. He is very against putting her in harm's way, but it seems like potentially her going into a dangerous situation is a way for her to prove herself. And as someone that was kind of told her entire life that she couldn't really do anything, this is something that only she could do pretty much, and so she wants to protect him the way he's protected her, and he is terrified of her being put in harm's way. So it's a very interesting. Their relationship is not 100% functional, but not quite to the point where I would say it's like toxic. It's just not a super healthy relationship dynamic, but I feel like he could be persuaded and be shown a different way of interacting. You mustn't, your majesty. Uh, love triangle abound. He made a mistake and is now horrified at his mistake, and that's where we are right now, and I want to see him kind of apologize to her. I'm really hoping that's like the next thing we see. Turning the mad dog into a genteel lord is really interesting. He was essentially created as a human weapon, and she's a priestess. And she's slowly been helping him kind of calm down and how to kind of teach him how to live as a person and not as a weapon. And because of that, he's grown kind of attached to her. It's hinted that they'll probably end up together, but right now, his feelings towards her don't feel um romantic so much as comfort to me. The Empress wants to avoid the Emperor is such a satisfying, like, if you want a revenge plot that's very satisfying, the Empress wants to avoid the Emperor is so good. Everyone that's treated her like shit since she was a child is getting their comeuppance, and I am here for it. My husband who hates me has lost his memories is something that I'm really looking forward to reading the next chapter on, because he lost his memories, the relationship got better, and to the point where she got a little bit complacent and comfortable, and now it seems like his memories are back and like he's gonna start treating her like shit again, but it was left off on a cliffhanger, and I'm like, I wanna see what's he gonna do? Is he gonna treat her like shit? What's going on? How to refuse the route is really interesting because one of the characters, so he's basically been reborn into a BL Otome sort of game, right? And he's been able to live like the past 10 years interacting with interacting with essentially what's like the game menu without anyone getting the wiser, but one of the characters has like become aware of it and is not happy with it. And not only that, but the main character seems to be dealing with something and not very well because he keeps turning his like pain sensitivity all the way to 0 so he can't feel anything. So we have no idea what the actual condition of his body is. It's really interesting. I am loving How to Refuse the Route. I can't wait to see where else this goes. How to Reject My Obsessive Ex-Husband. It's so interesting because it seems like they had a toxic relationship when they existed in our reality. They both died and were reborn back in time, but also in his original world because he was like a world like travel. Like he came from his world into our world. And when he was in our world with her, he was it seemed pretty toxic from her memories. We've only seen her perspective and her memories of it. And he seemed both cold to her, but then also very possessive and potentially jealous and controlling. But he seems to have viewed the relationship very differently, although we are seeing his jealous and controlling behavior a little bit when he thinks that she's getting in a relationship with a different Esper. Because that's a whole thing too, is that he's an Esper and she's a guide. And the guides have to help control the Esper's powers so they don't go on a rampage, essentially. And so when he sees her getting close to another Esper, he's getting like really fucking jealous. And when he finds out that she didn't burn the letter he wrote her, he thinks he has a chance, and so he's trying to like control himself, more control his jealousy. He's trying to win over her new parents that have kind of the parents that she never had, essentially. And that's where we are right now. And I really want to know more his perspective of their relationship. Because from her perspective, it was a very abusive relationship. But his reaction to her, to who she is as a person, and his memories of the situation seem to be very different. And so it was bugging the shit out of me. What is the disconnection here? What was his perspective? Because I feel like that's going to give us like a full circle idea of what actually happened in their relationship. So I am here for that. And the last one I'm going to talk about today is the villainous princess won't tolerate a bad ending. So it kind of seems like the two people that were creating the game died and then were essentially isekai'd into the world of the game. This very nasty person with a very nasty personality was given the sweet heroine role, where the person that was a little more passive but ultimately fairly sweet was given the villainous role. And it's kind of shaking things up in the game world, where all of the love interests seem to be falling for the villainess of the series rather than the heroine, and the heroine is becoming the villainess. But things aren't like because of they've changed some things. The world seems to be changing a bit, and certain storylines seem to be changing, and so we're kind of the creator, the more passive one of the two, is just trying to preserve the world that she created, where the kind of nastier one that took credit for her creation in their world seems to be trying to destroy it since she's not getting the interactions and the ending that she wants. So I'm loving it, and I right now we're at a spot where we're seeing the changes in the world that because so many things have not gone the way they were supposed to. And I'm really interested in seeing how that works and what comes from that. So I've rambled on long enough. I'm going to leave it here. Thank you so much for watching. Sorry, I hope this re-recording was okay. It was kind of hard to remember what I reacted to last time, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time.